Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to welcome Your Excellencies, distinguished guests and experts, professors, ladies and gentlemen, friends, to this webinar on the significance of the Global Civilization Initiative. We're honored to have all of our speakers, and we appreciate the opportunity to bring forth some significant points in a world right now that needs desperately a basis for friendship and cooperation rather than escalation towards conflict and war. So this is the premise upon which we work together, and I would like to welcome our friend and counselor from the Embassy of China, Mr. Wang, who will also help to bring us the words of His Excellency Ambassador Shui, who is traveling and could not be directly with us, but will be giving a recorded message. So please, you're welcome, Counselor.
Thank you.
Honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, friends, good morning. It is a great pleasure for me to attend today's webinar and have an in-depth exchange of views with you on global civilization initiative. A topic with rich connotations of our times. First of all, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to BRICS for organizing the event. I would also like to thank BRICS and all the guests for their dedication to enhancing the mutual understanding and friendship between the Chinese and the Swedish people. I look forward to hearing your insights on the above topic. Next, I would like to share several of my understandings on the GCI with you. Firstly, the GCI is an important part of the concept of human community with a shared future. In today's world, multiple challenges and crises are intertwined. The global mentality is resurging, and the geopolitics and the use of meteorological tools are somewhat prevalent. The traits of theory of civilization superiority and theory of clash of civilizations have been once again stirred up. Whether countries will go into conflict and confrontation, or share prosperity with each other, whether history will go backward or forward, depends to a large extent on how we view and deal with the differences among different civilizations. In March this year, President Xi Jinping put forward the Global Civilization Initiative at the CPC in dialogue with world political parties high-level meeting. This marks another major initiative proposed by President Xi Jinping with a focus on building of a human community with a shared future after the Global Development Initiative and Global Security Initiative. It is China's latest answer to the question of the century. What is wrong with this world? And what we should do about it? And it provides more guidance was put forward, it has attracted great attention and warm response, and has been widely welcomed by all sides. The GCI advocates seeking wisdom and nutrition from different civilizations, learning from each other's strengths, and making progress together. It emphasizes on fully joined the rich philosophies, profound humanistic spirit, and noble moral concepts in human civilization. It supports working together to solve major issues concerning the future of the world and the future of mankind, and letting exchanges and mutual learning among civilizations become the driving force of the progress of human society. The core concept of the GCI is the four joint advocates. That is to jointly advocate respect for the diversity of civilizations, jointly advocate the common values of humanity, jointly advocate the importance of inheritance and innovation of civilizations, and jointly advocate the robust international people-to-people exchanges and cooperation. Respecting the diversity of civilizations is a prerequisite for exchanges and mutual learning among them. The sun has 7 colors. The world is colorful. There are more than 200 countries and regions, more than 2,500 ethnic groups, more than 7 billion people, and various religions in the world. Whether it is an agricultural civilization or an industrial civilization, whether it is an Eastern civilization or a Western civilization, they all carry different historical heritage, ways of thinking and ways of life, and they all exist for their own reasons. There is no distinction among them in terms of good and bad, or superior and inferior. There should be no discrimination, hostility, and conflict among different civilizations. It is precisely because of the diversity of civilizations that there is value in exchanges and mutual learning. In a world that is interconnected and interdependent, building a human community with a shared future requires a combination of people from all over the world and the nurturing by diverse civilizations. History tells us that only by promoting exchanges, mutual learning, and inclusiveness among civilizations can we realize cherishing one's own beauty and cherishing and respecting each other's beauty. Practices of Christian civilization superiority, creating barriers and conflicts, engaging in zero-sum games, and winner takes all may prevail for a while, but will eventually disappear in the long river of history. Carrying forward the common values of all mankind is a guiding philosophy of exchanges and mutual learning among civilizations. Mankind lives in one global village, and we are becoming more and more community with a shared future where you're part of us and we are part of you. We objectively have common interests, which inevitably requires common values. The common values of all mankind, namely peace, development, equality, justice, democracy, and freedom represent the ideal values long pursued by people all over the world and the common aspirations of current international community. There's a common language of different countries, nations, and civilizations. At the present, some countries are forcibly imposing their own values and models on others, forming all kinds of small circles that exclude others, and even creating divisions and confrontations in the world out of selfish interest under the pretext of de-risking. This kind of behavior must be rejected and resisted. China will continue to be a staunch advocate and an active practitioner of the common values of all mankind, and make a continuous efforts to promote the development and the progress of human civilization, so that the gardens of civilizations of the world will be guardable and full of vitality. Attaching importance to the inheritance and innovation of civilizations is the source of motivation for exchanges and mutual learning among civilizations. Only by attaching importance to historical inheritance and development can civilizations return inexhaustible vitality and cohesion. The Chinese civilization is the only great civilization in the world that has not been interrupted and has continued to listen. Though, having traversed more than 5,000 years of history, it has always been in continuity and is permanently consistent. Attaching importance to the inheritance of civilization is an ancient and long-standing historical tradition of the Chinese nation, which fundamentally determines that the Chinese nation must follow its own path, and it must be able to walk its own path well. In the process of promoting Chinese modernization and realizing the great nation of the Chinese nation, the Chinese people have four cultural competence, inherit and carry forward the fine traditional Chinese culture, promote the creative transformation and innovative development of the Chinese civilization, and adapt the most basic cultural genes of the Chinese nation to the contemporary culture and the modern society. The Chinese people are comprehensively coordinating the development of material civilization, political civilization, cultural civilization, social civilization, and ecological civilization. We have created a new form of human civilization and will write a remarkable chapter in human history. Strengthening international people-to-people and cultural exchanges and cooperation is an effective path for civilization exchanges and mutual learning. There is an old Chinese saying, one studying without exchanges with others will be ignorant and ill-informed. Communication and interactions among civilizations are the basis for mankind to live together in harmony. The formation and development of ancient Chinese and Western philosophical thoughts are inseparable from the exchanges and integration among early human civilizations. The similarity between Confucius, word of great harmony, and Plato's The Republic is not accidental, but is historically inevitable. imperialist political and security cooperation, and economic and trade cooperation. People-to-people and cultural exchanges and cooperation are more long-lasting, broader, and deeper. They're not only a bridge connecting the emotions and hearts of people, but also bound with deepen mutual understanding and trust between countries. The present, the world has entered a new period of turmoil and change. With the resurgence of theories of West-centric and the clash of civilizations, international cultural exchanges and cooperation are facing severe challenges. Against this background, it is even more urgent and necessary to build a global civilizational dialogue and cooperation network and form a diverse and interactive landscape of humanistic exchanges. Secondly, the GCI injects development momentum into a closer global partnership. 10 years ago, President Xi Jinping put forward the Belt and Road Initiative, combining China's development with the development of countries along the route, and combining the Chinese dream with the dreams of the people of the countries along the route. It endows the Asian Silk Road with new connotations of the times. It provides a global platform for building a community with shared interests and a community with shared people, featuring political mutual trust, economic integration, and cultural inclusiveness. 10 years later, the BRI has attracted the participation by more than 3/4 of the world's countries and 32 international organizations, and has become the most extensive and largest international cooperation platform and the most popular international public good of the world today. The proposal of the GCI will undoubtedly inject a stronger impetus into the people-to-people bond among the BRI countries. It will make their cultural exchanges more fruitful and make the BRI a road for cultural exchanges and mutual learning, a road of harmonious coexistence of civilizations and people-to-people bonds, a road of common prosperity with cultural exchanges and cooperation. By hosting art festivals, film festivals, cultural relics exhibitions, book exhibitions, and other activities, China and countries along the route have built a bridge of friendship for people-to-people and cultural exchanges and mutual cultural appreciation. The Silk Road International Theatre Alliance, Museum Alliance, Art Festival Alliance, Library Alliance, and Art Museum Alliance have been established successively. They have grown to cover 539 members from 92 countries and 2 international organizations. More than 10 cultural exchanges and education cooperation brands, such as the Ruban Workshop, have been gradually formed, and various cultural exchanges outcomes have been achieved, which has continuously promoted the mutual understanding and the friendship of people from all over the world. Thirdly, the GCI will benefit all countries in the world, including China and Sweden. The history of friendly exchanges between China and Sweden and 2 peoples is a history of exchanges and mutual learning between different civilizations. More than 280 years ago, the voyage of Ship Rosenberg to China opened up the maritime Silk Road cooperation between the two countries, which not only brought prosperity and benefits to people in the region, but also laid an important foundation for the friendly relations between the two countries. Not long ago, I was invited to participate in the celebration of the 400th anniversary of Kosovo. The celebration, the organizers introduced the history of the development of Kosovo, most of which is related to China. It fully reflects the long history of friendly exchanges and cooperation between China and Sweden, and is an example of exchanges and mutual learning between the East and West. Looking back at the history, we are encouraged by the sincere and profound friendship between the two countries. Looking forward to the future, we should also firmly move forward along the path chosen by our forefathers. Today, China is Sweden's largest trading partner in Asia, and Sweden is China's 10th largest trading partner and the third largest investment destination in the EU. The economic and trade relations between the two sides are very vibrant. And there is huge potential for cooperation in green, low-carbon, scientific, and technological innovation and other fields. We welcome countries, including Sweden, to firmly stand on the right side of the history and the side of progress, human civilization. Actively support and participate in a series of Chinese initiatives, such as Global Development Initiative, Global Security Initiative, Global Civilization Initiative, and the BRI. Continue to elevate the level of practical cooperation between China and Sweden, and jointly broaden the road to the purpose of human civilization. Let me conclude by wishing this webinar a full success. Thank you. Honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much for your wise comments and words for the beginning of our webinar on the Global Civilization Initiative, Ambassador Shui. I would like now to introduce the next speaker, His Excellency Mr. Dmitry Mironchek, the Ambassador of the Republic of Belarus to Sweden. Ambassador, you're most welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brower. Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, colleagues, professors, distinguished webinar participants, I'm pleased to take part in today's discussion on the Global Civilization Initiative. In fact, those who have been closely following the recent events of the BRICS Institute have had a valuable opportunity to gain a comprehensive impression of the President Xi Jinping's ideas. Ideas that draw on China's millennia-old school of thought, ideas underpinned by the growing power of the People's Republic, and through their unifying agenda, ideas of particular value in today's divided world. I believe that in order to better understand the scope and significance of the Global Civilization Initiative, so broadly presented by my distinguished Chinese colleague, we should also consider the overall context. As a Belarusian, I will offer you the perspective of a country like Belarus, medium in size, but certainly not in importance. Looking back at the unipolar moment that followed the end of the Cold War, it is fair to say that the West experienced kind of euphoria. This was best expressed by Francis Fukuyama's famous end of history narrative. The victory of the ideology
Ambassador, your sound has disappeared. Sorry. We don't hear you.
Oh,
Now you're back.
now I'm back.
Yes.
Sorry. What was the last moment when I was audible? Sorry.
You were speaking about the relevance of Belarus and the
Yeah, the last part was on the Francis Fukuyama narrative.
So the victory of the ideology of so-called liberal democracy was proclaimed as final and indisputable back in the middle of the 90s. The rest of the world, including China and Belarus, which had never sought to erase the Soviet legacy from its history, were told to accept it and submit to it. But even then, ideological coercion alone was not enough to unite a world so complex and diverse. So the familiar tools of labeling, dividing, and then forcibly imposing the Western vision came into play. Today, much of the world, and especially the countries of the Middle East and North Africa and of the post-Soviet area, are still paying the price for the crusade for democracy that the West has been waging. Every method has been actively used against those who dared to disagree, from lethal military interventions to seemingly harmless so-called revolutions through social networks. There has been an unprecedented proliferation of illegitimate sanctions that have become almost the main tool in the arsenal for dealing with dissenting states, including Belarus. But even at the height of the unipolar moment, the West did not have an ideological monopoly. There was indeed an alternative to Pax Americana under the banner of liberal democracy. And it did not lie in yet another Western notion of clash of civilizations put forward by Samuel Huntington, which Ambassador referred in his speech to. The alternative to the clash and subsequent forceful unification was dialogue and peaceful diversity. Dialogue and peaceful diversity of civilizations. Perceptions of the world that was growing more diverse and of its implications for international politics began to take shape almost 3 decades ago. The 1994 report of the Commission on Global Governance put together by the United Nations, titled Our Global Neighborhood, recognized the emerging trend of growing diversity and called for, I quote, a new kind of dialogue among civilizations. In 1997, Iran stepped forward with the idea of dialogue of civilizations, which emphasized the imperative of positive interaction, dialogue and understanding among cultures and religions. Building on the initiative, the United Nations designated the year 2001 as the year of dialogue among civilizations. In its wake, Turkey and Spain launched at the United Nations a dialogue within the frame of the Alliance of Civilizations initiative. So the idea was very much in the air. Belarus, like China, has spoken in favor of these ideas. As a firm supporter of the principles of the UN Charter based on the postulate of non-interference in the internal affairs of other states, Belarus respects the choice of peoples for systems of government and social political order. We believe that any nation that does not pose a threat to international security and whose government works for the development of its own people should have the right to freely enjoy all the benefits of international cooperation without any restrictions, sanctions, or preconditions. In this context, the President of Belarus proposed from the rostrum of the 2005 UN Summit to recognize the diversity of ways of progressive development as a value of human civilization. This initiative was a natural complement to the efforts of Belarus and the majority of UN member states to build a more fair world order and strengthen international law. My country's initiative was incorporated into a number of documents adopted under the auspices of the UN and the non-aligned movement. Last autumn, Belarus proposed a practical step, specifically for the United Nations to draft a charter for the world's diversity in the 21st century, whereby all member states in a concerted manner would be able to set out some key principles for governing international life in a non-hegemonic and very diverse world. That is why we have been moving in the same direction, together with a lot of other countries. We've been moving in the same direction with our Chinese friends. The ground was ripe for Belarus to welcome with satisfaction and hope the Global Civilization Initiative put forward by the leader of the People's Republic of China in March this year. And not only because of the conceptual clarity and coherence of the four aspects of joint advocacy. The many years of successful implementation of the Belt and Road Initiative, as well as the Global Development Initiative, suggest that these proposals of President Xi will be institutionally reinforced and quickly take the form of concrete projects that people and countries need. In fact, some of the projects were mentioned in the speech of my distinguished colleague ambassador of China. Belarus has become one of the first countries to join the Belt and Road Initiative and to support global development and global security initiatives. Therefore, Beijing and other nations can firmly count on us as participants in the Global Civilization Initiative. Thank you, and sorry for technical disturbances during my speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Mironchek, for your insightful remarks. And I think we heard all of the relevant concepts you wanted to communicate, even with a little bit of disturbance. It was not a serious problem. Thank you very much. I would now like to introduce the next speaker, who is the Vice President of the Green Belt and Road Coalition, Erik Solheim. He is also the former Executive Director of the UN Environmental Program. And of course, he's a Norwegian. So you're very welcome to, you have the floor to speak, Mr. Solheim.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for asking me to speak to this distinguished audience. And hello, Nihal, to everyone. Let me start with an experience I had just a couple of weeks back, and it was not in China, but it was in India. At the beautiful Narmada River in central India, in the state of Madhya Pradesh, that means the central state of India, they will set up a huge temple and tourist complex dedicated to one idea, and that's the idea of oneness. This is a 3,000 years old Indian concept. Oneness, meaning we are all one in humanity. Chinese, Indians, Europeans, African Americans, we are all one humanity. And humanity and nature is one. We cannot separate ourselves from animals or flowers or lush mountains or lucid waters, as President Xi has framed it. And I think this is very wonderful. It's also an idea which is as current and actual 3,000 years ago as it is today. And if we can move ahead as humanity based on the idea of oneness, we will achieve quite a lot. I think it's common sense. Every important issue of today's world is easier to resolve if we work together. Climate change, environment, bringing everyone out of poverty, preparing for a new COVID, restarting the economies of the world after the COVID. Whatever is the issue, we will solve it much easier together than if we allow someone to separate us. That's of course why these initiatives from China, whether it's Belt and Road, which I'm very much engaged in, or global civilization or global development, these are very welcome initiatives because we need to work together. The 21st century will be a century of multipolar power. For sure, the United States and China will be the two main powers of the world, but India is an important power, so is Turkey, because European Union is powerful, Brazil, South Africa, there are Indonesia, there are many powers who want to make an imprint on the 21st century, and we need to work together in the spirit of different civilizations working together. And what seems to be absolutely obvious is that every nation wants to modernize, but they don't want to westernize. We tend to forget that this has been the big discussion in every developing nation for the last 150 years. The first to crack that issue was the Japanese. In the major revolution in the 1870s, yes, they understood they needed to modernize. The United States could attack them at will. They didn't want that to happen, so they needed more powerful weapons and they needed to build railroads and modernize. But they modernized on the basis of being profound Japanese. Korea, now one of the most modern nations in the world, but they're exporting Korean culture to the world. My daughter is going to Paris to listen to K-pop. It's all in Korean language. It's all to celebrate the brilliant culture of Korea. They don't sing in English, and the historical references is to the bright history of Korea. But look around, China is modernizing, but is also deeply rooted in the Confucian culture. India is modernizing, building data centers and trying to move into a modern economy in the same way as China, but based on the great histories of the Chinese culture. In Turkey, President Erdogan was just re-elected, again based also on an appeal to the Turkishness of Turkey. So we will see a 21st century where every nation will celebrate its own culture while trying to modernize, because those who don't modernize will, of course, be the losers in history. Then comes, how can we organize such a world in a better way? And I will suggest two main words. Number one is respect. We need to respect each other. We need to leave aside all sort of arrogance and respect other cultures, which has brought so much to the world. And the second is dialogue. We need to listen. I mean, God gave us 2 ears and just 1 mouth. That was why it was a very clear hint that we need to listen more than we speak all the time. But if we could be more humble, showing respect and dialogue with each other, we will solve the problems of this century much better. What many Westerners don't realize is, of course, that throughout nearly all of human history, China was the most advanced place on Earth. I think at no other time the difference was bigger than during the Song dynasty from 900s to 1200s. At the time, the two capitals of Song, Kaifeng first, later Hangzhou, they were both cities of more than 1 million, maybe up to 2 million people, with a splendid restaurant culture, with a quite big, what we could consider middle class. Many more people could read and write than any other part of the world. And technological development was far ahead of any other place. At the time, Hangzhou and Kaifeng was between 1 and 2 million people. The biggest city in Europe, Paris, may have had around 75,000 people. So the difference was enormous. When Marco Polo came back from a visit to China, to Europe, after spending 20 years in China, he was called Il Milione. That was irony in Italy, because they thought he was exaggerating his experiences from China 1 million times. They couldn't understand how much more advanced China was at the time than we were in Europe at the time. But of course, it's not just China, India, so many other civilizations have contributed to this wonderful planet, and we need to work together as different civilizations. What are the main obstacles to overcome for this to happen? I believe that the number one obstacle is the arrogance of the West, and in particular the arrogance of the United States of America. Yes, America has achieved enormous progress in the last 200 years. It's been the most important nation in the world in the last 100 years. But it's also the most secure nation in the world, to relatively weak neighbors, Canada and Mexico, to huge oceans on both sides. Then there's no threat to the mainland of America. And America is starting getting into the attitude that they cannot accept any other power to be at the same level as themselves. The United States need to accept that there is a peer in the 21st century, and that peer is China. China is far from as militarized as the United States. The United States has 10 times more nuclear weapons. The United States has bases basically all over the planet, while China has just one in Djibouti. So in military terms, the United States is superior. But when it comes to technology, culture, economy, human contact, whatever other issue, there are two peer powers, and the United States need to accept that. And the United States need to leave aside the missionary instinct, which basically thinks that the entire world would be much better if every nation was a copy of the United States. The Western system should be taught to everyone, and everyone should simply say thank you and accept it. That will not happen. For the next 100 years, I give the bet the United States will not adopt the political system of China, even if that in many areas are superior to the Americans. But nor will China adopt the American system, even if that in some aspects or in some areas also are superior to the Chinese system. We need to learn from each other and respect each other, but no one will adopt the system of anyone else. I mean, the Indians will not adopt the American system in any way either. So US and the West need to come out of this arrogance and accept the reality of the 21st century. China is a peer power, and India, Turkey, Indonesia, many others are also central powers for the 21st century. If we can allow this to happen and we can defeat this missionary instinct of the West, we will have come a long way. But since this is also an audience of kind of friends of China, allow me to give two advices to what China can also do better to improve global partnerships. One is China could put a little bit less emphasis on pride and honor. When some politician in some nation, whether it's say Lithuania or Australia, attacks China, let it go. There is no need to counterattack. Just let it pass. If the United States is attacked, the United States don't feel the need to counterattack. They just accept it, and it's passing. China is now so powerful, so glorious, with such an enormous progress on environment development, everything, that China can just let some of these criticisms just pass and not invite quarrels. And the other area where China can also, I believe, improve is to accept that China is in all relationships except the relationship to the United States, the most powerful partner. And when China is the most powerful one, it could be expected from China also to be flexible. That applies to, say, the border conflict between China and India, or to issues related to the South China Sea with Vietnam or the Philippines. It's very good news, by the way, that the Vietnamese ministers were just in China and met with Prime Minister Lee and many other officials. So there was a lot of progress there. But when there is a small conflict with Philippines or India or Vietnam or others, China is the most powerful entity. And when you are the most powerful, China can also allow itself to be flexible in all these issues, because these are very, very minor issues compared to the big issue of the day, which is how we can handle the global areas. Finally, we need to find the right combination of competition and cooperation. Competition in itself is not negative. Business competition is a main driver of positive change. Look at the Shanghai Auto Fair in April in Shanghai. It was an enormous shock to Volkswagen, to Ford, to Toyota, to see how far during COVID the Chinese electric car companies have come. BYD has now passed Tesla as the biggest provider of electric cars in the world, and the Chinese companies showed cars which are much more advanced, much more high-tech, batteries which are lasting much longer. China is simply the lead, far ahead of anyone else in electric mobility. Well, that shock has a positive impact on the Western companies. They understand they need to compete and they need to improve. So we'll see a race to the green, which is good business competition. But this nice business competition must be within frameworks. The frameworks need to be set by the World Trade Organization, because otherwise we will go into a war of subsidies, a war of benefits to domestic industries, rather than a rational global system of a mixture of competition and cooperation. But I'm sure we can find that if we show the political will. The World Trade Organization is the obvious arena for solving potential business conflicts. Finally, I spoke about the Song Dynasty, which is maybe the time of history where China was most ahead of the rest of the world, but it was also, of course, in reality the same during Han or Tang or many other dynasties. But during the Song Dynasty, something very important happened, and that was the Shan-Yuan peace. At the time, Song was the most powerful nation in the world. But the second most powerful nation in the world was also in China. That was Liang. Because China was so far ahead of the rest that both the most powerful nations in the world were in China. Song controlled what is today central and southern China, and Liang controlled what is today Beijing and the northern steppes. They were in lots of quarrels and conflicts. Then in the year 2005, they met in the city of Shan-Yuan, and they made the Shan-Yuan peace. For 100 years, these two most powerful powers in the entire world kept peace. There was no wars, no conflict, and that, of course, was a main reason why Song could develop so fast, because it could focus on culture development rather than on outside wars. So here there is a very important lessons learned to President Biden, President Xi, Prime Minister Modi, President Putin, President Macron, whoever it is. If we can keep peace and work together globally, there is no limit to what human civilization can achieve in the 21st century. We can be the 21st century version of the Song Dynasty in China. If we keep peace, we will develop very fast. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Solheim, for your very dynamic input for the discussion and dialogue, which I think is highly relevant and productive to promoting the kind of discussion that the Global Civilization Initiative is designed to promote. So I very much appreciate your remarks. I hope there will be questions and discussion in the course of this webinar. Now I would like to introduce our next speaker, Professor Jesse Ching Li, the Executive President of the Guangdong Institute of International Strategies in Guangdong, China. She is a partner of the Belt and Road Initiative. My colleague, Mr. Hussein Askari, met Ms. Qing Li in China, and we are very happy to work together to promote the significance of the Belt and Road for humanity as a whole. So thank you, and you're most welcome, Professor Li Qing.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Good morning and good afternoon, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Li Qing from Guangdong Institute of International Strategies. Thanks to Stephen's invitation, I have the privilege to be here today and discuss the topic of civilization with all of you. Our time is one of the challenges that are often colossal in terms of the scale and the severity. Just in recent years, we have events such as the COVID pandemic, the climate crisis, events that pose serious challenges to international market and universal well-being of mankind. Since the end of the Second World War, the world has witnessed as many as 22 cases of major crises in areas such as energy, finance, and currency. On top of that, there also have been more than 200 cases of armed conflicts and civil wars. These questions can be territorial, financial, economy, and ideology, but not regional. They affect the entire world and all the lives living in it. The future decades will be a time of volatility and uncertainty, a critical challenge to our collective civilization and a challenge we must face collectively. In the 90s, the American scholar Samuel P. Huntington proposed his influential theory, the clash of civilization. Huntington suggested that the definitive factor leading to the conflict in the post-Cold War world will be the differences between the cultures and religions. The instigates of the past, such as ideology and nationalism, will only play secondary roles in the 21st century. From his point of view, at some point, the worst is mostly likely to come into conflict with Islamic and Chinese culture. Following the rapid decolonization, the 20th century, the power structure of the world has changed from a polarizing one to a dynamic one. It has changed from a stage where cultures of shared root could influence and dominate the rest of the world, a stage where multi-side interaction, communication, and comprehension between cultures happen continuously. Firstly, it is thanks to the variety of civilization and the distinct qualities that the country's development and achievements are made available to the entire human race. It is based on the understanding towards the historical development of the human civilization and the understanding towards the modern form of the human civilization, invented by the Chinese model of modernization that President Xi Jinping proposed the Global Civilization Initiative for the first time this year, calling for the respect for the diversity of civilization and communication across the world and the cultural backgrounds. The proposal also points out the needs for the countries to fully control the relevance of the history and culture to present times, and work for the creative transformation and innovative development of the traditional culture. Secondly, cross-cultural communication is the foundation of coexistence. Many contemporary conflicts were caused originally by obstacles created by a lack of understanding towards groups of different language and customs. And the key to eliminate these obstacles and the foreign conflicts is communication. With communication, what is described to be inevitable according to the crash of civilization can be avoided. Communication and tolerance also enable opportunities for prosperity. For example, for more than 1,000 years, the Silk Road connecting nations and regions such as the ancient China, India, Persia, Arabia, and the Roman Empire, supplies with the world with not only exotic commodities and wealth, but also culture and scientific roots, enrich both the public and the private lives of mankind. People nowadays should not overlook the profound contribution it once made for cultural communication. After all, we can still benefit from today. And this leads to the third and final point I want to make: tolerance over prejudice. Our civilization is the product of thousands of years of diligence and wisdom. It is the past, the present, and the future of the nation and the people that it presents. It is not a single superior one among the world culture, only the respective speciality and stress. Each culture's achievements should be equally celebrated and respected, for they also belong to the entire human race. It is tolerance and communication that enables cooperation and development. This rule had been proven many times in history, in philosophy, and in arts. William Shakespeare begins his play, Coriolanus, on such a note. In the face of an angry mob, a Roman senator tells them a story. Toes and fingers are dissatisfied with the stomach, who sits still but digests all the foods. But when toes and fingers stop working, the body is starved. The same idea applied to the culture. If there isn't any cooperation and mutual respect, the world as a whole suffers. We should be thankful for the abundance of the culture on earth, but it requires strategies to preserve and benefit from this diversity. International cross-cultural communication and cooperation is critical to shared prosperity of mankind. The supporting pillar to any productive international partnership in this new era. This is what should be promoted, especially with many challenges we are facing today. We should strive to create a respectful and productive atmosphere where friendly communication and trust can be established, not only between one individual to another, but also between one nation to another, a world of tolerance and of prosperity. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much for your wise input. Communication is the beginning of dialogue and development, and without it, we are going, unfortunately, in wrong directions. So we appreciate very much your ideas. I would like to ask one of our guests, who is Mr. Lev Panin. Are you able to be with us now for the entire rest of the webinar?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
Okay. I had to ask you because I want to first, for specific reasons, ask if Professor Faisal Ahmed, who is with us from India, he is a professor of international business in New Delhi. He has been working actively in the international context to promote the idea of the Belt and Road as opposed to geopolitics. I also think that this is part of the significance of this webinar, that we are having speakers from China. We have speakers from India. We have speaker from Russia. And even though I'm a Swedish citizen, I am originally from the United States, so I can say we have a speaker from the United States as well. I would also like to emphasize that our guest, Counselor Wang, is here to receive and discuss questions. We welcome you, although we understand Ambassador Xue is not able to be with us live, but we're most gracious and appreciate your presence. I wanted to just make that clear, that you're very welcome to make comments and contribute as you see fit. Yes, Professor Faisal Ahmed, I would like to offer you welcome you to speak, and thank you so much for being a part of this.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Stephen, and good afternoon, good morning to all of you. I'm joining from New Delhi to speak on this very important topic on an invitation from Mr. Brewer. I'll begin with the idea of the Global Civilization Initiative that we have recently seen, which is encouraging an inter-civilizational dialogue. Before that, we have seen initiatives from China coming in, like the Global Development Initiative, which focused on development largely, and the Global Security Initiative, which focused on the security aspects. One of the initiatives which have been taken by China in the security aspect, that has been brokering that peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which we have recently seen. The present one, which is about the Global Civilizational Initiative, is about largely focusing on the inter-civilizational dialogue and strengthening the people-to-people contact. There has been largely advocacy on at least 3-4 issues in this Global Civilizational Initiative, which I will talk about. It talks about that a country should uphold, principles of equality, dialogue, and inclusiveness among the civilization, and the cultural exchanges should be such that it can transcend clashes and it can lead to coexistence, so that countries do not have a feeling of superiority among themselves. Now, when we look at the other side, we find that we have been listening to things like freedom and dignity of man, liberty, equality, and fraternity. Those are also some of the aspects which have governed human understanding for a long time and still continue to do so. And at the same time, when we try to relate it with one can visit the War Remnants Museum in, for instance, Vietnam, to exactly know what this idea of freedom and dignity of man holds like. So therefore, it's very significant that China has come out with something like encouraging an inter-civilizational dialogue, which can actually improve the understanding between various civilizations. And I think this is the time which has come that there are certain, narratives which has come from the West and particularly the United States as well, positioning China as an adversary, which is not finding a suitable place in the political discourse today, because many countries who are otherwise compelled to believe that China is an adversary are somehow not able to believe it. They are being, this is being trying to, the West trying to propagate among the allies, among its own allies, to buy this particular narrative. But it forgets that most of its allies are actually dependent on China for various means, whether it is related to geo-economic or related to the security or geostrategic aspects. Therefore, these things are actually putting the clash back in the civilizational narrative, which should be done away with. Now, as we just heard that what the ambassador was talking earlier about, that BRI attracted the 3/4 of world countries, countries of the world which have tried to become part of the this BRI. Now, if you look at all the BRI corridors and try to see that how does it contribute to the civilizational linkages, surprisingly, whether you go from China to Mongolia or Russia, or you're going through the new Eurasian land bridge, or you're going through West Asia and Central Asia and other regions. Of course, there is one region which is the CPEC, which is China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, to which India has strong reservations based on the sovereignty issues. But then if you look at corridors like Indo-China Economic Corridor and all, there have been substantial work which have been done. The Laos train, which runs from now Laos to Kunming, have actually tried to connect people from Indochina to China. There are several examples related to that, which has made significant contributions in terms of bridging the civilizational, gaps and trying to connect civilizations. Now, the another point which this Global Civilization Initiative talks about is joint advocacy of a common values of freedom, and countries should actually refrain from imposing their own model on others, and they should avoid ideological confrontations. Now, when we look at the national security strategy of the United States, once again, which came, and the defense strategy, which came in 2017, around when Mr. Trump was the president, it clearly talks about that China is trying to create a model which is against the US values and interest. Now, the point is that is any country not allowed to create a model which is against American interest? I mean, this is where the whole idea of freedom and equity and equality and relations between countries and inter-civilizational dialogues are being questioned. I mean, every country, I think, is free to come out with its own model of governance, which it thinks is the best one, and which it thinks that other countries can follow and worth replicating by other countries. Countries cannot follow an economic governance model based on what the United States want or what is subservient to the US interest. So therefore, I think when we are talking about the common values of freedom, when China is coming out with the ideas that they should, countries should refrain from, imposing their own model on others, and they should avoid ideological confrontations, I think it makes immense sense in today's scenario. If we look at the post-COVID situation, and we look at the trade and supply chain issues that we have been talking about, now, if you just ponder on a single question that in a post-COVID scenario, which country mended the supply chains? Which country reconstructed? Because of whom the supply chains got reconstructed? Because of which country the supply chain were restored? And answer, of course, is not United States. The answer, of course, is China. So therefore, it is very important that if you look at issues coming up like the supply chain resilience initiative we have seen, which wanted to reduce the dependence on Chinese supply chains at one point of time in the COVID times, it didn't work actually. it didn't come to a pragmatic, gains and pragmatic conclusions which it was supposed to give. China plus one, there was a huge, buzz about China plus one that is trying to reduce your dependence on Chinese supply chains and also trying to relocate a part of your supply chains to some other country, for instance. Now, if you look at China plus one, it was again a costly affair for the countries and they could not be following it because many companies, multinational companies, despite getting a lot of incentive, we have seen Japanese government giving incentives to Japanese companies to move out of China, and still it was not happening. Even the US companies were not willing to move. So if we are talking about peace, justice, and common values, I think this type of, this promotion of this type of, differences in terms of approaches that you take to different countries is not a very civilizational, thing, and it is against the cultural aspects which is promoting universalism in human understanding. What presently the United States has tried to do. Now, the third point that is about the inheritance and the innovation of civilizations, and country needs to actually harness history and culture, and they need to push, the creation and transformation of their traditional culture. There have been various initiatives we have seen, like if we look at with India, we have a Mekong Ganga cooperation, which is a cooperation between the civilizational aspects of people living along the Mekong River and the Ganga River. So there are a lot of initiatives which have been done in the last 23 years because it was established in 2000. So in the last 23 years, several initiatives have been undertaken in terms of establishing civilizational interlinkages between the people who are living along the rivers of Ganga and Mekong. At the same time, we have seen that if you look at this aspect, we have seen infrastructure financing becomes a very critical issue, and BRI has been largely, accused of debt trap and all these things. The reason becomes very simple, that if you look at what is the Western alternative, or is there any alternative? That is one issue. When we come to alternative, we have seen just recent ones in last 2 years coming up, something like the B3W, which is the Build Back Better World, which is a $40 trillion infrastructure financing supported by the G7, and then Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. But then this $40 trillion money is to come from the private sector. The issue is, why is the private sector going to make an investment in an infrastructure financing to the tune of $40 trillion, and who is the one who's going to regulate it? So therefore, these type of initiatives are definitely not an alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative. The promises, the initiatives which are put forth through the Belt and Road, I think the B3W or Indo-Pacific framework, they are not going to compete, though they are trying to position themselves against, the BRI. Also, if you look at the debt trap narrative, most of the time we look at only two sides of the narrative. One is what does China say, and other is what does the West or the United States say. There is a third idea of the narrative as well, which is about the recipient country. The recipient country too have a narrative. And that narrative is that they want money to build their financing, to build their infrastructure, whether it comes from the United States, whether it comes from China, or whether the World Bank is going to finance them, it doesn't matter to them. Now, we have seen that the World Bank and other international financial institutions have put very stringent norms on so that these countries are not able to actually get loans sanctioned for infrastructure financing. And therefore, we have seen emergence of things like the New Development Bank or the BRICS Bank or other type of, Asia in infrastructure investment banks and all these things coming up. These are actually not because the developing countries want to contribute to infrastructure financing, but because the World Bank and financial institutions have largely failed to deliver, in fact, especially for the countries of the global South. And lastly, I'll talk about the last point, which is about the people-to-people exchange. And this becomes very important because people-to-people exchange is one of the ways of, confidence-building measures. Here, whether you talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, is connecting almost 3/4 of the countries of the world through various ways, whether it is by roadways or railways or, multimodal transportation system or building, special economic zones or various other ways. And another point that I wanted to highlight here is about the issue of film diplomacy, which is very, very critical in the pursuit of people-to-people, connect. Because what happens that when we talk about cinema, it can actually connect the young people of various countries. And if I talk from an Indian perspective, we have very good, established film industry. So it connects the young people of India and China and even other countries of the world and tries to strengthen that linkage between them. Also, we see that there are many pragmatic, possibilities of film diplomacy that we tend to ignore. I'll just give you an example that in September of 2014, Chinese President Xi Jinping visited India and signed a film co-production treaty in New Delhi. And the same year, China was the focus of international film festivals. So I think this is also one of the critical areas in enhancing people-to-people contacts, which remains very crucial. And somehow we have to look at this aspect as well. And this is going to promote mutual understanding and friendship and, advance the progress of human civilization as envisaged in the Global Civilization Initiative, which has been initiated by China. So I thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Faisal Ahmed. I think it's important that you, as a representative of the nation of India, which is also a great civilization, it is now, as I've understood, the largest population in the world. So the basis for cooperation and development, especially with India, China, and in addition, the next speaker, who I will now introduce, who is the other great civilization, geographically the largest nation on the planet, which is the Russian Republic. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Lev Panin. He is from the Russian International Affairs Council. I had the pleasure of doing an interview with Mr. Lev Panin, which is on the internet, YouTube, for those who wish to listen. It is also, in my view, the fundamental basis to build bridges between Europe and Russia and China as well. So I would welcome Mr. Panin to give us his remarks, and thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank the BRI Institute for organizing this very representative panel, which is very important in our divided times. So I'll try to speak about the Global Civilization Initiative from the perspective of the Russian Federation as a country which, with a rich history and very diverse culture. We understand the importance of respecting and learning from different civilizations. The Global Civilization Initiative, in our opinion, recognizes that security, development, and civilization are closely interconnected. We believe that by promoting inclusive coexistence, exchange, and mutual understanding of different civilizations, we can create a more just, equitable, and sustainable world for all. Russia has a very long history of cultural exchanges with other civilizations. Our literature, music, and art have been influenced by various cultures, and we have also contributed to the development of other civilizations. We believe that respect for the diversity of civilizations is essential for promoting equality, mutual learning, dialogue, and inclusiveness. Russia has been the most productive, influential, and at the same time peaceful at the time where there was a community of civilizations in Europe in the 18th and in the 19th century. As we transcend the civilization barriers through exchanges and rise above inter-civilization conflicts by mutual learning, we can overcome the sense of superiority by instead promoting coexistence. We should all recognize and truly understand that there is no superior civilization over others. Each civilization embodies the wisdom and vision of a country or nation, and each is valuable for being uniquely its own. These ideas are echoed in the new Russian foreign policy doctrine. For instance, instead of seeing, for instance, Africa as a tool or a territory to be swayed in an international conflict, Russia sets as its goal to foster sovereignty and the ability of African nations to be strong and truly independent in the world. There's also a very similar concept of country civilization represented in the doctrine, and the doctrine names Russia as one of the country's civilizations while recognizing other countries' civilizations. The Global Civilization Initiatives offers a practical outline to some of our most pressing problems, whether it's addressing climate change, ending and fighting poverty, or promoting peace and security. This initiative recognizes that these issues are very closely interconnected and that we need to tackle them together by working collaboratively across borders and cultures. We thus can develop innovative solutions that benefit everyone by drawing on the experiences of different nations and civilizations. This initiative is also very important because of its geopolitical nature. It's neither globalist per se, nor anti-globalist, because it promotes civilization cross-learning while respecting civilization and country sovereignty. This is a much healthier arrangement than cultural and political isolationism on the one hand, or on the other hand, complete globalism and trying to create certain world culture or one way of doing things. In the 20th century, the world has already seen a competition between three massive universal ideas of capitalism, fascism, and communism. In the 21st century, we should not be clinging to any kind of overarching notion of how to do things, whether it's communism or Western-style capitalism. The only way to describe and shape, as the only ways to describe and shape the world, the only way to achieve a stable future, in the opinion of a lot of Russian experts, is to abandon the world of universal ideas and to recognize that every country has its own unique traditions and characteristics and should not be confined into one ideological frame or economic frame. It's much healthier to be constantly adapting your policies and international posture, drawing insights from other countries and systems. Russia fits really well into the Global Civilization Initiative. We believe that it offers real hope for the future in the world that's becoming more and more multipolar. The world often can seem bleak and divided, and this initiative reminds us that we have a real power to create a better world if we are willing to work for it and forgo some short-term goals that foster competition in exchange for longer-term ones. In conclusion, we should commit ourselves to building a more just, equitable, and sustainable world. It's very important to foster cultural exchanges and to create more opportunities for people to connect on a face-to-face level. And those connections, in our experience, are able not to solve unsolvable differences, but they're able to show people that we are all in this together, then the world is a joint system, and that playing zero-sum games in the modern world is very dangerous and unsustainable in the long term. And speaking a bit more about some practical things that I think China could utilize to promote this initiative. First of all, it is the promotion of various soft power means. As I know, Chinese soft power had some problems in Europe, unfortunately. And in our opinion, it's very important to try to reach out to more Asian countries, to Russia, for instance, and to the African world, because I think that China, as one of the oldest civilizations, recognizes their civilization status and is able to foster very deep and serious, first of all, cultural and economic connections. And that's the end of my speech. I tried to emphasize the place of Russia in the possible place of Russia in the Global Civilization Initiative, and how well it actually aligns with a lot of Russian foreign policy priorities. Thank you very much again.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Panin. I can just briefly mention that the colleague of Mr. Panin, Miss Julia, is presently on her way to a conference in Beijing, which is a dialogue or basis of cooperation between the Russian Federation and China. This obviously is also a part of a basis for cooperation and working relationship which China and Russia have. It seems to upset the powers in the G7 and especially the United States, but hopefully they will begin to recognize that this direction of cooperation and finding solutions is the only way to move humanity forward. I would like to ask my colleague, Mr. Hussein Askari. There was a speaker, or I think an attendee from Pakistan, who would like to make some short remarks, if I'm not mistaken.
He hasn't yet, no.
Okay.
So you may go ahead if you wish to make your statement.
I thought that I would actually invite you, one of our speakers, if you are ready, one of our speakers who I will mention, Matthias Lind, who is an engineer and researcher of Chinese language and culture in Sweden. He's a young man who is a good friend, and unfortunately he was scheduled to participate as a speaker, but became ill and is not able to join us. But I'm very glad that he would have stood for the idea of cross-cultural understanding between China and Sweden, which, as we stand for, is also extremely important. And hopefully Sweden and the decision makers in Sweden will eventually embrace the Belt and Road Initiative as well. So therefore, I would like to give the word to Mr. Askari, and you're most welcome.
Thank you, Stephen. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, happy to be with this very special panel, very diverse, which is beautiful, like a garden where 1,000 flowers grow. So it's wonderful to be here. First of all, I would like to congratulate all Muslims in the world. Today is the Eid al-Adha, one of the highest, festivities in the world for Muslims. As Muslim people from all nations of the world, millions, they go to Mecca for the annual pilgrimage. It's a wonderful day of atonement and harmony, but also forgiveness, where people can be somehow born again and plead to lead a good life and do good in the world. Also congratulate all those nations who are part of the Belt and Road Initiative for the 10th anniversary of the launching of the Belt and Road Initiative. I would like to start first with the title of our webinar, which is Decoupling or Bridging Civilizations. And the question of decoupling, or now in the EU called de-risking, it's important to address that one because it's a crucial matter and it's a serious matter, because on the economic side, decoupling or de-risking, we in the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden, in cooperation with the Guangdong Institute for International Strategies, we did a study earlier this year on the global supply chains, especially after the U.S. administration, issued its CHIP Act on the semiconductor, trying to decouple from China. So our research showed, and the title of our research was The Entanglement of Global Supply Chains, Why Decoupling from China is Suicide. Interestingly, yesterday, the foreign minister of Hungary, he used the same term. He said decoupling from China would be suicidal for Europe, which proves the point we have made, because the supply chains of the globe, not only with China, but globally, are so entangled. It's impossible to separate one nation from the rest of the world. So therefore, it's interesting. I mean, even in the recent visit by China's Premier Li Qiang to Germany and France, it was very clearly shown by German and French industrialists that this is not an option for Europe to decouple from China. And therefore, this is becoming a reality today. And hopefully, we will see the idea of decoupling, which is a more serious issue right now. We see there's attempts to decouple from China as a civilization and as a nation. There has been a massive attack on China as a culture. We have seen with the shutting down of Confucius institutes in several European universities, even in the United States. Here in Sweden, there's even a targeting of children, Chinese language schools right now, a massive media attack, which is really, really unbelievable, because learning Chinese language is one of the most important and basics to get it to know, open the doors to China and finding that. So hopefully this will also, like the economic decoupling, the cultural decoupling from China would be unsuccessful. Now, I spent 1 month in China recently. I visited 6 provinces. I was also hosted by the GIIS, Mrs. Li Jing and her colleagues. I don't claim to be an expert on Chinese civilization, but in that month, I was happy to visit almost 15 museums and archaeological sites in China, and to see the breadth and depth of Chinese history and culture and civilization, which I really recommend that everybody does, to travel to China and stay there not only 1 week, but take as much time as possible and visit different parts of China, but also visit these museums and sites to get a real understanding of how deep and impressive it is. I mean, this applies to every nation, but we are talking about China. It's very important. And the things I learned from this very short introduction into Chinese culture is that there are 3 important features of China which we need to understand, because to have a dialogue, we need to understand the other side too, not only ourselves, which is also important, is that the Chinese civilization, as Ambassador Sui said, there is continuity. It's a one of the only civilizations which have been a continuous existence, but it's also not only continuing as it has been for 5,000, but it has been evolving. There's an evolution where China, and that's my second point, has inclusivity. It takes good impressions from other civilizations and adapt it to the Chinese context, like taking in Buddhism, taking in even Islam. And I saw in many parts of China, there are Muslims and Muslim communities and mosques that are not only the oldest in China, but are the oldest in the world, actually, that have existed for 13th centuries. So China takes in, it's inclusive, it takes in the good impressions from other civilizations. And the third point is that China is sharing. Because China has made great contributions, it doesn't keep a monopoly over its culture or technological innovations, but it shares it with others. One of the greatest examples, which I have studied myself, that what happened between China and the Islamic world. Already in the Tang Dynasty, 750, we had the first contact. Unfortunately, it was a clash, but then it was resolved very quickly, and diplomatic relations were established between the Muslim Empire or the Baghdad Caliphate and the Tang Dynasty. And one of the greatest gifts that the China gave and the ancient Silk Road provided to the world was not silk, it was not gold or silver or spices. Actually, there was not much silk trade in the ancient Silk Road. The idea of Silk Road is a modern invention by European Orientalists. But this is the most important thing which impacted global civilization, as I showed in China, it's this: the ability to produce paper on an industrial scale. Of course, China gave intangible things, but this is a tangible gift which China gave to the Islamic empire. And because we had an enormous intellectual outpouring in Baghdad and other centers of culture during the Abbasid Islamic Renaissance, but there wasn't enough material to put it on. All the works of philosophy, medicine, architecture, science, every aspect, there was a flourishing production, but there wasn't enough material to put it on and spread it. So by learning from China to produce paper on an industrial scale, that thing spread all over the planet, especially the areas under the control of the Islamic Empire in West Asia, Central Asia, but also to North Africa and parts of Europe. And that helped contribute even to the European Renaissance, because the Muslims, they not only translated from Greeks, the works of Plato and other philosophers and scientists, but also helped bring that back to Europe, which was the basis for the rediscovering Plato, for example. As Ambassador Sway, he mentioned Plato and Confucius. Rediscovering Plato, again, in Europe, in the European Renaissance, was a very important contribution of the Muslim world. So we have like a civilizational supply chain where one nation helps the other to develop. Although you might have conflict, but each nation hands over the torch of civilization to the others. And this is a very, very interesting aspect. One of the good examples how this civilizational supply chain happens is in Plato's dialogue Timaeus, one of the most important dialogues of Greece civilization, but had enormous impact on Europe. Timaeus deals with the creation of the universe. But in the beginning of the dialogue, Plato talks about when Solon visited Egypt, because most of the great Greek philosophers and scientists, they went to Egypt for education. They were taught by Egyptian priests. And that was somewhat of the things that not really mentioned so much. So we have this continuity, a supply chain of civilizations. So this is one of the important issues we have right now, that to have, and also as all the other speakers, especially Eric said, we have these two things: to show respect and to show and have a dialogue to bridge all the differences among civilizations. We have to figure out and find what are our common grounds, rather than where we differ from each other. And I think there's ample examples in history where the clash of civilization led to dark ages. We experienced that many times, but also we had this dialogue of civilizations, as in the examples given today, and as I'm talking about now, that this is going to be one of the most important challenges, but also initiatives, and therefore the Global Civilization Initiative launched by President Xi Jinping has come at a very important point in history. It's a complementary to the Belt and Road Initiative, to the Global Development Initiative, Global Security Initiative. All these things are one parcel, one package, but the Global Civilization Initiative is the highest level, because that really explores the ideas why each nation exists. What is the purpose of each nation and civilization? What is the purpose of each individual in these civilizations? And what are our common grounds that will be actually it will pave the way to have the Belt and Road, the global development, the sustainable development goals. All these things could be resolved if we reach an agreement on common principles for our nations, but also our civilizations. So this is a very important aspect of the work of the Belt and Road Institute, and it is the beginning of a much, much deeper discussion. So I thank you for listening, and I hope to continue the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Askari, for your wise input. And I believe right now that besides myself, I will make some remarks, which I believe I will begin because our final speaker for the day, Professor Li Xing, the professor of politics and society at Aalborg University in Denmark, is not able to rejoin the webinar until after 11, which is some 10 or 15 minutes from now. So I will make some remarks, and then I think we will hopefully await the arrival of our final speaker. In the meantime, I want to again emphasize we have this kind of real living dynamic of what the Global Civilization Initiative is, that is being resonated through this webinar, where we have precisely, in the case of Mr. Solheim, he mentioned his visit in India and the notion of oneness. He is working actively in both India and China. This defines the kind of framework that can be achieved. Professor Faisal Ahmed will be, I'm sure, with us many times in the future, promoting these ideas from the standpoint of India. We have had, and I believe there will be, an input at some point of one of our former guests from Pakistan. My colleague and I, Mr. Askari, recently spoke at an international webinar in Pakistan, which is also available on the YouTube. And maybe he might be able to share some of the links if that is of interest. So we have in this very webinar, and of course, Mr. Panin from Russia, we have the foundation for precisely what represents the growing dynamic of a global civilization initiative but also a growing dynamic in world history where nations are beginning to work together and are in fact finding alternatives to this unipolar one world type of arrogance through both new forms of financial agreements that are being that were being presented in the in Petersburg Economic Forum. Also, one of my colleagues from Norway, Mr. Glenn Deason, was present at that. Unfortunately, he couldn't be with us today in this webinar, but there is this growing dynamic of no longer accepting this attempt to demonize the world, except in the eyes of those unipolar ideas that are simply no longer working. And I think that's the proper spirit that we are setting for not only this webinar, but into how we can continue to influence, promote these ideas in a broader sense here in Europe, as well as in other parts of the world. Okay, so what I will say here, I will read some remarks, and they will hopefully initiate a certain type of discussion in the context of what we have already been presenting. The 10th year anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative is being celebrated this year, 2023, by the increasing number of nations choosing to join and participate. It is now approaching 160 nations. Since the BRI was launched in 2013, it has been the backbone of a global infrastructure development perspective to modernize, industrialize, and eliminate poverty among the developing nations, but always has been open to all nations to join and to cooperate in a win-win opportunity for a community, for a shared future for mankind. The additional initiative by President Xi Jinping for a global development initiative, a global security initiative, and finally, the Global Civilization Initiative are additional initiatives not to replace the Belt and Road Initiative, but to complement it and to engage the broadest possible part of humanity in an open spirit of cooperation and ultimately even friendship. Why then do the G7 and the US and the UK and even the Scandinavian countries, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland presently refuse to embrace an opportunity to avoid conflict and war and instead direct their energies to an increasingly dangerous and aggressive military alliance in NATO, and simultaneously continue warning about decoupling, or as my colleague mentioned, de-risking? In reality, it involves deeper reasons than merely the geopolitical power maneuverings attributed to the one power unipolar world versus a on the other hand, a multi-polar world. The problem, which was identified quite clearly by Mr. Solheim about the arrogance of Western civilization, has certain deeper underlying philosophical aspects to it, which need to be identified not only to free the West of how this cultural matrix is forcing the parts of Europe and the G7 and the US especially into a dangerous dynamic, but also even for my dear friends in China to understand a deeper side of what is causing this kind of demonization of China and the refusal to embrace the kind of cooperation of the Belt and Road and also the Global Civilization Initiative. As I had stated in my remarks to the Forum on Global Human Rights Governance in Beijing, where I attended on June 14th and 15th, I see the Belt and Road Initiative as emerging out of the depth of Chinese 5,000-year civilization, a civilization deeply indebted and influenced by the ideas and wisdom of Confucius, perhaps not exclusively, but certainly very substantially. These ideas are an integral part of China's culture. They make up the souls and the hearts of the Chinese people. I saw this for myself, even in the brief time that I was in China. They're not aggressive or power hungry. Quite the opposite. They are characterized by a fundamental goodness of human beings to build moral character in harmony with nature and the universe as a whole. In light of this decision of Xi Jinping to launch the Global Civilization Initiative, it stands out as a beacon of hope for all mankind. Ironically, as an American, this attribute, which at one time belonged to the US in its infancy, as a new republic inspiring the rest of the world, is now increasingly seen as the future hope of developing nations. Joining the BRI to emerge out of poverty and achieve a better life for their people. The great problem in the West today is the dominance of a cultural matrix, no longer based on a Renaissance spirit of men and women in the image of their creator, a culture which grew out of the ideas of Plato, that human beings have innate ideas, a creative potential for innovation, a quality lacking in beasts and other animals, and based on the goodness of human beings to strive for increasing perfection and the common good. Instead, the dominant cultural matrix in the West is a combination of a Hobbesian law of the jungle, where human behavior is regarded as fundamentally evil and self-serving, egotistical, whereby brute force becomes the solution to problems. But Hobbesian thinking emerges out of an actual philosophical enemy of Plato, which was Aristotle. Aristotle saw human beings as mere logical beasts whose knowledge was limited to and based on an entirely sense certainty. That is, knowledge which comes only through the five senses. In this way, men and women were like the beasts, acquiring knowledge solely through the five senses. Thus, Aristotle saw no distinct and clear difference between men and beasts, as Plato and his followers did. This difference in philosophical thinking between Plato and Aristotle is as significant in its consequences for the Western cultural matrix as Confucius is for China's cultural matrix. Although this distinction between Plato and Aristotle's philosophical thinking is not always consciously understood in general in Western society today, it is nonetheless a decisive determinant in the present cultural deterioration and even decadence that dominates, especially among Western decision makers. If we wish to return to a dialogue between East and West it will be necessary to resurrect the ideas and principles of Plato in Western thinking. No easy task, and in fact, a great historic challenge, but one will serve the best interests of a common bridge for mankind. As I mentioned in remarks to the Forum for Global Human Rights Governance, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, a great thinker and a follower of Plato, was perhaps the greatest Western thinker and philosophical thinker who understood and embraced the idea of a common bridge between Europe and China. That would be an excellent place to begin on the historic journey to build and embrace a global civilization initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I may take the role of the moderator now. Now, Professor Li Xing is with us now. He may have his presentation.
You're muted, Professor.
Okay, Hussein, you want me to start now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Perhaps that I need to show some pictures. It's better. Can I share my screen? Is that okay?
Yes, yes, you can.
Because it's important I show some pictures. Is that okay? Can you see that?
Yes, very good.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Stefan and Hussein, for the invitation. I regard myself as an external affiliate of this institute, so I regard myself as part of this webinar. I'm very proud to be invited and to speak to you. And if I use my title, The Eastern Origins of Western Civilization, this is the book actually by John Hobson, and I'm going to tell you why I want to use this title. Today, as Stefan pointed out, that China has 4 global initiatives: the Belt and Road, the development, the global security, and global civilization. All these 4 represent a kind of world reordering with Chinese characteristics, not in a way that China wants to shape or create a new world order. I don't think that, but at least an emerging world order embedded with Chinese characteristics. This is, I'm quite convinced, okay? Especially now we're talking about global civilization initiative, because I think it's so important to discuss this topic today. As a professor working in the Western university for 30 years, I am so upset with the fact that the younger generation of Western countries, they grown up with the Western power, Western wealth. They think that the history, what they say is history. I don't think so. And there is no education in the university, even in the high school, to teach the student about the contribution of other civilizations to Western civilizations. And this is what Stefan just talked about. And this is why I tried to borrow the book title by John Hobson, a conscious professor from UK, where he claimed that it is totally wrong that Western civilization was entirely originated from the Greek civilization. That's wrong. East Asia actually should be placed on the forefront of the story of progress in world history. And that's why I borrowed his book title to be my presentation and title. If we talk about civilizational influence, impact, or exchange, of course, the Silk Road, I would argue that from the Han Dynasty was the origin, that the Arab nations, the Persians, they were the trader between Eastern Roman and Chinese Empire, okay? But the real contact, neural knowledge actually came to Europe via Marco Polo, and especially Europe was shocked by Marco Polo's book, not written by him, but based on his story. And his book inspired, first of all, Christopher Columbus, because one of the Columbus remainings after his death was this book. So definitely this book inspired his overseas exploration. The second is the great impact on the missionaries, the Catholic missionaries, and one of them was Matteo Ricci. And this guy was very important because he brought a lot of knowledge from Europe to China. At the same time, he translated a lot of Chinese classics, including Confucianism, and translated them into Latins and later published in Europe. And he even collaborated with a Chinese official to make a world map, because he told Chinese many stories about early European expeditions, colonial experience in the rest of the world. So all this knowledge compiled into a world map, and that was his great inspiration and his contribution, and that, I believe, inspired Zheng He's expedition. Okay, and we all know that I will mention about Zheng He later on. We all know, if we read European history, the Renaissance, religious reform, and also Enlightenment, especially the European Enlightenment, and don't forget that Chinese civilization was among the sources of ideas, inspirations, references, and even comparisons and critiques of European Enlightenment scholars. Figures like Leibniz, Voltaire, and Quincey, especially Voltaire, people can find many of the publications by Voltaire through Google. You can find, and he wrote a lot about his comparison between the Chinese culture and the Western culture. He actually praised Chinese history and culture. He called the Chinese system, even though it is authoritarianism, but it is benevolent authoritarianism. And such authoritarianism is based on meritocracy, not based on inherited system, like the European system at that time. And also the physical inventions, the Great Four inventions. And we all know that the sinologist Needham, Joseph Needham, he published together with a Chinese assistant professor 7 volumes of science and technology in China. 7 volumes. He made a great contribution. Even in Cambridge University today, there is an institute called Needham Institute, and he actually traced the Chinese invention, and he claimed that just like Hobson, that many of the Chinese inventions, they were the origins of Western technological advance. Both Francis Bacon, the philosopher, English philosopher, and Marx all praise the great inventions and their contribution to the advance of European history. I just mentioned Zheng He, that I believe that this curiosity about outside world was received from Matteo Ricci's missionary expedition in China. Zheng He, he made 7 voyages from 1405 to 1433. And history, many historians we discussed why Zheng He made 7 expeditions all the way to Africa, eastern Africa, and he brought back no single colony. What happened? Okay, so that's why that I think that if people read the news about Blinken's visit to China 2 weeks ago, the Chinese counterpart told him that the Western logic, a rising power is doomed to be hegemonic, expansionist. It does not fit China. China does not have the history, does not have the culture gene to be a hegemonic power, to be an expansionist. So I think Zheng He's experience shows that demonstrate this. When we talk about the Eastern origin of Western civilization, then I have to give some evidence. What are the Eastern origins? And here, I think Professor Shahid Alam from Northeastern University, later on, he published a very good article on the magazine called The Dissident. He asked his students to do an exercise in which that they have to find out that whether a human being can go through a typical day without running into ideas, institutions, values, technologies, and products that originate outside the West. For example, China, India, Islam, and Africa. For example, you wake up with pajamas, is not Western. You soap and shampoo, wash yourself, is not Western. Toothbrush was invented in China, not Western. Toilet paper, tissue, they were also Chinese inventions. The breakfast, okay, cereals, coffee, they were not Western. Okay, many of the origin of the words, the Western word, they were also not Western in origin. Even the English language, the alphabetics, the English 26 alphabetics, they were not Western. I told my students, they were shocked. What? Yes, they were not Western. They came to Europe from Phoenicia. This Phoenicia group already, died out, disappeared. And also Arab number, we use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They were, why they called Arab number? Because they were invented by Arab. Even university degree, bachelor degree, bachelor was originated from the Islam graduation ceremony. Many of the field studies, scientific terms, even gold bar was already used in Egypt for 14th millennium before the Christian. Marco Polo came back to Venice and told people about how paper currency was used in China, which will shock the Europeans. And he told people about how the Chinese use paper as a currency made from a bark of the mulberry trees. So his conclusion in his article is that during the 18th century, many of the leading Enlightenment thinkers, they were keenly aware that China or Chinese had preceded them in their emphasis on reasoning by some 2 millennia. By the end of this century, the last century, however, a more muscular, more confident Europe choose to erase their debt to China from its collective memory. Okay, and by ending my presentation, I want to again mention Stephen Brouwer, the organizer of this conference. He said something extremely interesting. Okay, he said the global civilization initiative builds bridges between cultures. And in his speech in China, he said that the present ongoing effort to demonize China is based on a combination of fear and the virtual total ignorance of both modern China and great history over 5,000 years civilization. So thank you, Stephen, for your very innovative and very forceful words. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Lee. We have actually quite a bit of time to utilize in discussion and questions, which I think could be very positive for this exchange. I would mention one thing that I neglected to mention, but I think has the right spirit in the fact that the founder of the United States, the father of the United States, more than any single individual, understood to be Benjamin Franklin, was a great follower of Confucius's thinking. He even understood that the moral aspects of building character in a context of a moral relationship to the harmonic ordering of the universe was something that had and should eventually play a very important part in the founding of the US Republic. Now, that has ironically been completely disrespected by the decisions of eliminating the Confucian institutes in the US. So the poor, ignorant types like Marco, I forget now his name, the senator in Florida, who's been one of the more avid critics of the Confucian institutes, and there are many others. But the most interesting fact is that the very founding of the United States had a direct relationship in the founding father of the United States to the benefits of understanding and recognizing Confucian culture, Chinese Confucius culture in the United States as a whole. That's the kind of thing we need to bring back. It will take some work to find a way to educate the likes of the American public. Joe Biden, I'm not quite sure if it's possible to reach him, since he seems to be aging quite quickly and having trouble to walk around and think clearly. But the future leadership of the United States, and even under the present circumstances, if that kind of direction would come to bear, I'm sure we would find the pathways to cooperation with the Belt and Road. So I just mentioned that part of American history.
Stephen, I think we have a couple of guests who have to leave, but I would like to ask, there are some questions. Mr. Eric Solheim has to leave soon, but there was a question sent to him and to Professor Faisal from India by Mrs. Li Xing, who herself has to catch a plane soon. But she's asking the two of you, Mr. Eric Solheim and Professor Faisal, or Stephen, sorry. She says, why the Western countries have so many misunderstandings to Chinese civilization? What are their suggestions on how to tell the China story or narrative to them? So what can we do to explain China to people in the West?
Eric, please.
I think a starting point, which is very important, is to restart all sorts of people-to-people contact after COVID, because true, there are underlying interests. I mean, people who don't want a good relationship between China and the US. I mean, there are certain circles or between China and the West, there are certain circles in the US who try to promote a bad relationship. But nothing was helped by COVID, because COVID stopped tourism, made business contacts, academic contacts, everything a lot more difficult. So to restart all this as fast as possible, get tourists to visit, of course, Chinese tourists to come to Europe, European and American tourists to go to China, open up the air routes. There still are much fewer flights than there was before COVID, opening up academic contacts, make sure that business people are visiting in both directions. Some of this has started, but it's still slow compared to the situation before COVID. And all this will help. It will not solve all problems, but it will help. So Prime Minister Li's visit to Germany and France is a very good starting point for this, but we simply need to step up all the contacts a lot more. Then, of course, we need to fight back. There is a lot of negatives about China in Western media at the moment. The counter narratives must be put forward. China is today the most modern society on the planet. If you go to, say, Guangzhou or Shenzhen, you will be taken aback by the modernity of China, while many Westerners still have an impression of China as a kind of something similar to the Soviet Union, or a place with an enormous amount of pollution, which was the case 15 years ago, but it's basically disappeared everywhere. So you need to set out a new narrative about China, and also the fact that China historically has been a very, very peaceful nation. China has not been involved in any war since 1979 with Vietnam, while the United States has basically been involved in every war in the world in the last decades in one way or the other. So opening up all sorts of contacts and getting the counter narrative into media and the global conversation is my main suggestion. If you finally will allow me a somewhat related comment, because I think we all agree that the idea of decoupling is suicide, as was said. It is very dangerous. It will be an enormous loss for everyone, for China, for the West, and for developing countries, for everyone. But there is also another issue of de-risking, which need to be handled in an appropriate way, because we need to kind of establish some sort of rules. China will not allow Microsoft or Amazon to build the basic infrastructure in China, because China sees that as something where they want domestic control. So, say for Europe to say that some basic infrastructure in Europe will be made by Ericsson or by Siemens, that is not irrational. That's basically applying the same rules for Europe and for China. And also, of course, European companies want control of some of the value chains. Again, that is not irrational. I mean, China is not totally dominant in all the value chains for the green economy. I mean, everything related to batteries or electric vehicles. China is and renewables and is far ahead of anyone else, totally dominant. The people in the West have not realized yet, but business is realizing it. And of course, European companies want some control over their value chains. That applies to the competition with China, but also to the competition with the United States and others. That, again, is not irrational, but it needs to be handled in the context of the World Trade Organization or accepted global rules. So I think what Li Qiang initiated during his German and French visit was very helpful, because we need a practical conversation as to how we can manage the business competition within framework of global cooperation. But overall, to end up, we need to fight back against all those who want to decouple, all those who smear China in Western media. It's very unhelpful, very dangerous. And we need to fight back, and we need to open up as many levels of contacts as possible.
Thank you very much, Mr. Solheim. There was a question submitted first. It sounds partially as a consular affairs question, but also a question on communication. Mrs. Marina Kerber, she says that I have so far contacted the Chinese embassies in Croatia and Serbia regarding the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. Either you don't get an answer, or the answer is not saying anything. How could this be done better? I expect a lot of China, and this is a compliment. So I don't know if Councillor Wang wants to address that question, but it sounds more like a consular affairs question. Serbia and Croatia, the embassies, how can get more information from them about the BRI? Somebody suggested that we could get more information from Professor Peng Ke-ming from Guangzhou. He says we can provide you all the information you want as academics. There are other sources of information of the BRI, but why? How to communicate with the Chinese embassies in Serbia and Croatia?
I think so we can help try to contact our colleagues in the embassies in Croatia and Serbia, and to find out what the problem is, and hope we can help them to have a better exchange and communication.
Yeah, thank you. One advice my experience, if you in the country where you are, you want to have official information from embassies, you contact the embassy where you live, not contact embassies in another country. So I think that question is answered. We have a question for Professor Faisal Ahmed by Ulf Sandmark in Sweden. He says, Professor Faisal Ahmed mentioned the importance of the film industry to promote cultural dialogue among especially young people. I had the privilege to visit Beijing and the Center for Promotion of Touristic Trade. There, the quality of all the actors in tourist trade were systematically improved to become very important actors in the dialogue of civilizations. The knowledge of the workers in touristic sites, hotels, transport, and restaurants were systematically improved with help of the most advanced academic experts. Does Professor Ahmed or someone else want to comment on using films, tourist industries, and other self-financing trades to bring masses of more actors into the dialogue of civilization? Also possibly with other youth exchange activities, sports, and music events.
Yeah. I think this is a very important point that has been raised. What from the previous question and this one also, what we generally need to understand at this moment is that there is need for repositioning of the image or the brand of China, which has actually been largely being damaged by the Western narratives today. Including the American narrative. So a repositioning actually is required, which is very, very important. And repositioning is like making a new image in the mind of the people so that they understand the correct image and not go by the Western narratives. In fact, if we look at, try to know about China, all the civilizational prowess, all the great civilizational prowess that China possesses, it's no longer in the discourse because everything has been, overpowered by those fake narratives. So therefore, I think that some of the points that one issue that the films that they mentioned, there are other issues, including films I'll talk about. We have to see the whole issue is about confidence building measures. Now, if you go for confidence building measure, one of the best way for improving or enhancing the confidence building measure is the people to people contact. So therefore, opening up tourism and business to business meetings like relaxations in the visa norms for more business to business interactions. The scholarships to study, this is very, very significant as a soft power, because if you look at the United States, they've given huge amount of scholarships to countries across the world to develop a pro-American orientation over a period of time. And now China would also be looking for, when it is striving for becoming a making a significant impact on the world and the civilizational impact on the world, I think it should be looking for putting up a lot of scholarships, opening up a lot of scholarships in various fields of interest for students coming from different countries of the world, so that they have a understand the Chinese characteristics and the Chinese way, and when they go back to their own countries and join government, they have some orientation toward the understanding of the Chinese policy in a positive way. At the same time, one very significant thing, I think, which is worth understanding from what various few countries like the United States have been doing, addressing students in different countries on official visits by leaders, head of state or head of government. When we have seen in 2010, President Obama coming in India, he didn't come to Delhi straight away, New Delhi straight away. He went to Bombay and addressed students, undergraduate students of St. Joseph or some college in, undergraduate students of some college in Mumbai in an open air, amphitheater. And he was standing and speaking to the students. And students were raising questions on him right from United States to Pakistan to Kashmir issues to China issues and everything. And he was just responding to them. Of course, in a very, sometimes being more diplomatic, sometimes in a different way. But then the point is that this interaction becomes very important in enhancing the image of a country. I mean, when leaders go on official visit, like the ministers or the head of state or the head of government, and if they organize a meeting like this in one of the prestigious universities in those countries, and answer and address the local students and let them ask few questions which they can respond to, that goes way ahead in enhancing the image of the country. This is what exactly happened in India when President Obama addressed the students. I mean, there was a huge, a pro-US orientation everywhere in India because President Obama was talking to the students directly. Then another thing, like when we talk about BRI, one of the biggest narrative that comes in, BRI is about debt trap or BRI is facing implementation problems. Now, these two issues have to be handled through a counter narrative. There has to be some research-oriented, articles or research-oriented counter-narrative, which actually says clearly, giving examples. And I read Hussein's, I think, one of the posts on LinkedIn, which was, quite interesting to go through, which actually talks about that no, BRI is not a debt trap. And some of these should come from governments in China, and some of these should come from experts and scholars across the world as well, and who are not necessarily from China. Then, because this is a very general understanding, if you talk to anyone anywhere in the world, especially in India, if you talk about BRI, so there are only two things: it's a debt trap by China, and it's facing a lot of implementation issues, it's not going to be successful. These are the two key points which need to be addressed. Now, the issue about the films which have come up is very interesting. As I told you, it's a matter issue which connects people. I wrote one article earlier also with a Chinese friend on that was largely on India-China film diplomacy. But then that made sense because this is how you develop a geocultural connect and a people-to-people connect. Today, it is very important that Chinese films, because we have Netflix, various types of OTT platforms, so a lot of Chinese films and dramas, television dramas, they can actually be marketed through Netflix and various OTT platforms. If you look at India today, one of the very significant, films and dramas which have taken up is from South Korea. So today, every kid today wants to watch on Netflix and OTT something coming out from which is a South Korean film or South Korean drama, and of course these are not in English. So most of the time they are in their Korean language, but you get a script of English translation below that. So exactly the same thing if it can be marketed. OTT and Netflix platforms for film and episode-based, serials and dramas which can be marketed by the Chinese industry, that will make immense impact on enhancing and developing its outreach among the younger generations in different countries. And one example I would say is, like, we take the example of things like Doraemon in Japan, which has created a huge impact. Like, every child would like to, just because they have seen Doraemon, so they believe that Japan is like full of fantasy, and they would like to visit Japan at any point of time, having a very, positive image about the country. I think most of these this is happening in the age group of people who are between 16 to 25 years of age. And therefore, cinema and these OTT and Netflix platform can create a really huge impact in image makeover and repositioning of any country. So I think these are the points that I wanted to just talk about. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Li Xing.
Yeah, I agree with Professor Ahmad's comment, but I think that what Asar said, most things are taking place, efforts taking place outside the West. But now I'm living in the West, so I witnessed how the West is becoming more paradoxical, paranoid, and very reactionary towards China. The Confucius Institute used to be a bridge. It's closed everywhere. In my university, it's closed. I established 2 China-oriented educations. They were closed. So somehow the West become very much rejective towards this kind of civilizational exchange. So how we can improve a situation here, it's quite a big challenge. I think Hossein did a good job in terms of give counter narratives, different narratives. But I think what I do is that I try in my teaching, in my role, I try to convince the West is that your vision is not shared by the majority of the world population anymore. You do not represent. When the United States talk about the rule-based order, but that order is the Western order. Other countries do not agree. For example, Cambridge University published this new global survey shows that the great division between North and South, the North, 1.2 billion population, they are very negative towards China, towards Russia. But the global South exactly is the opposite. They are very much overwhelmingly positive towards China, and also quite a large percent, 66% positive over Russia. It's great surprise to the West. Even the Munich Security Conference report shows that there is no single country in the global South that joined the sanction. Okay, they condemn at discourse level, but in action they never. So even the West recognize that there is a division between the Western's worldview and the global South. So now I think we should promote this and try to convince the West that you are not representative anymore. I think this is also one way of doing things. Thank you.
I just a reflection in my trip tour in China. As I said, I was in 6 different provinces, different parts of China, and I had lectures in 6 different universities and academic institutions. But there's enormous frustration by the students that China is trying to help the world with the Belt and Road, poverty alleviation, but everything, all we get back is this resentment from the West and so on. So I said, first of all, you have to look at the facts, because every week China and the Belt and Road wins new friends.
Yes.
And the adversaries of China and the Belt and Road lose friends every week. And more nations are joining the Belt and Road and China. So it's very important for people to think about reality rather than the narratives. But then on the part of narrative, most people complain that the Chinese are not good in communicating the good things they do, which is in a certain way. But China is, has been focused on other things. China has been focused on doing real poverty alleviation, developing the economy, developing the culture inside the country. They don't want to dominate others. They don't want to tell others what to do. And therefore, they have not had this policy of imposing or, but you take a comparison. In 2021, the US Congress unanimously voted for the Strategic Competition Act 2021. Now, there are 3 articles inside that act pertain to the Belt and Road and China, and they established a fund called the Encountering China Influence Fund. And the funding is $300 million each year for 5 years. That's $1.5 billion that will be spent through American embassies to spread narratives about China through bloggers, so-called independent media, buying journalists, buying people with money to spread narratives about negative narratives about China. Now, you can build 30 modern hospitals every year with that money in Africa, which would be much more helpful for the image of the United States rather than, but China does not do that. China does not, spread negative narratives about other nations, but there is need by China within the framework of respecting the sovereignty of other nations to promote what China is really about. I mean, one simple thing is, there should be people should see how Chinese people live every day. I saw that myself, and I saw one very fascinating phenomena. I go out walking around the area, around the hotel where I used to live, or just take a taxi with someone, a translator. And you see in parks, in public places, people are dancing. They have music and they dance. It's like this is their after work. And the people are so happy and joyful and optimistic. I haven't seen such a phenomena in any other country, especially here in the West. We are very pessimistic. We have enormous crises. Our culture is, in trouble, and people are depressed, scared. But the Chinese people, they live a different life. But at the same time, they see all the terrible things happening around the world. And of course, that's a matter of concern. But they should never forget that they have done a great job in China, but also they are gaining new friends every day. Never forget that.
Yes, thank you, Hussein. I would just add a few points. Were there any other specific questions you wanted to bring up yet, or?
We don't have from the questions from the attendees now.
Okay.
Wait a minute. There's Ulf Sandmark. I think it's a question to Professor Mironchik. Sorry, Ambassador Mironchik, sorry. He says the BRI flagship Great Stone project in Belarus is a very active part in China-Europe trade. What is the situation currently with physical trade and transport with Western Europe, considering the effects of the conflict in the neighboring countries, i.e. Ukraine?
Indeed, the Great Stone Industrial Park is what was once called the gem of the pearl of the Belt and Road Initiative by President Xi. And we totally agree with this description. What is peculiar about the Great Stone is a combination of it being part of the logistic chain between China and Western Europe, and at the same time it being a center, a hub for development of cutting-edge technologies in many spheres. We see this as a combination which guarantees sustainable development of the Great Stone, regardless of the political weather. But even under the weather, as it is now, I should point out that the trade flows going through Belarus, they are demonstrating remarkable resistance to negative influences of political disagreements or of sanctions and counter-sanctions which are being applied now by the West and Russian Federation. First and foremost, we see that the railroad project and Great Stone and Belarus is the part of the railroad axis between the Western Europe and China, is demonstrating remarkable speed of development. To give you an anecdotal evidence, I get requests from companies to help them get their cargo on this rail. And as my colleagues tell me, we already experienced the bottlenecks along this railroad especially the Trans-Siberian part. But I think as we get closer to the exhaustion of the current capacity of the existing railroad network, we are also getting closer to new initiative aimed at expansion of this capacity. I am not able to produce off-the-cuff exact figures right now, but please rest assured that railroad connection between China and Western Europe through Belarus works smoothly and without any major problems. It is also in demand due to several reasons. First of all, and foremost, this is the result of natural development of China, because attention given to the development of the continental part of China, of the inner provinces of China, is bearing fruit. And we see that industrial output in Western China is increasing exponentially. Together with it, increases its exposure to foreign trade and increased trade flows from continental China, from Western provinces of China towards Western Europe. And we also see that trains traveling from the West towards China, which at times, some 10, 12 years ago, were sometimes traveling with empty containers, they are now traveling fully loaded. Belarus also contributes to the growth of these volumes of cargo being transported, in part due to complicated overall situation. Like, we are experiencing problems which are remarkable in themselves, especially against the background of the global food crisis, because decisions adopted by the European Union are impeding us from supplying customers all over the world, especially in Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia, with Belarusian fertilizers through what once has been normal route, Baltic seaports. We no longer have access to these seaports, which contradicts, in fact, international law, providing certain guarantees to landlocked countries like Belarus, contradicts to common sense. But thanks God, we have railroad connection with China. And a lot of fertilizers are now being transferred via land. Another reason, of course, we see that, especially during pandemic, when a lot of countries experienced problems with their supply chains and the speed of supply, maritime supply, railroad supplies, which are at least twice and at times 3 times as fast as maritime routes, have proven to be really effective. And they help to bring down the costs of production, making final products more accessible to the people who are now experiencing, in many parts of the world, economic problems, also artificially created economic problems caused by application of sanctions or other instruments which should be left in the past, really. Sorry for not providing you exact figures. You caught me a little bit by surprise by your question, but I hope that I gave you a description of the current situation, which is of use. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the answer gives enough information on the status of the situation. I mean, I know personally, through research I've done, that, for example, despite all the tension between the EU and Russia and Belarus, actually Poland is now developing the rail connection and logistics hub on the border with Belarus at Malawice-Brest connection on the border. And as you said, Your Excellency, actually the freight has been increasing between China and the EU through Russia, Belarus, something which we reported about last year, which was interesting to see. But like Poland, the EU refused to finance that project on the border with Belarus. So the Polish government decided that they will finance this important project because it's for the future of Poland. That the new Silk Road, as I think the Polish railway director said, we quoted him in our report, he said, this is our future. It's important for Poland's future to build this and expand the new Silk Road, the Iron Silk Road, or the China-EU express rail. So this is a very telling thing about the difference between reality and ideology, between the needs of the people and where politicians have their mind. And I think this brings us to the question of we have the biggest crisis in Europe right now is Ukraine, of course, and the question of Ukraine being a bridge between the East and West rather than it becoming a new Berlin Wall is very, very important. But I know that Ukraine was one of the first countries actually that joined the Belt and Road already in December 2013.
Yeah, well, I think what my colleague emphasized is the fundamental factor, which is the reality of how the world is changing and the reality of what is occurring with the BRI, the recognition of the great majority of people and nations working together with it. That has to get out. Now, the problem that we have, I think, was identified by Mr. Solheim, that in addition to creating the people-to-people contacts, which are very crucial, even understanding the need to learn Mandarin, to read. The Chinese are very actively engaging in learning English to reach the world. I think it's very important that it goes in the other direction. Maybe the purpose of shutting down some of these institutes has been to prevent that. But the other thing that I think Mr. Solheim mentioned is we have to fight. Now, that doesn't mean military fighting, which is not helpful under the circumstances that the world is facing, but it does mean that there has to be a fight for truth. Because what is going on with this demonization, with the debt trap, these scenarios have come out of a foundation in the US, the Jamestown Foundation. The story about genocide in Xinjiang, the debt trap story. These they're not mistakes. These are intentional distortions of reality and the truth. And that is where I think we have to engage ourselves in a dignified way, because you cannot have a functioning communication and dialogue where you are at least reaching the basis of respect for one another in terms of culture and nations, if you have no respect for the truth. And that has to be a challenge. The unfortunate fact is that the great majority of citizens in the West are being bombarded by mainstream media sources with ideas which are intentionally misrepresenting things. That is a challenge that I think we can meet by this kind of event, by further engagement in interviews, which I'm happy to do with the Russian International Affairs Council, with other institutions that I was so grateful to be able to speak at the major event in China. I hope that perhaps my colleague and I will be returning soon. We have to demonstrate that the principles, some of which I attempted to delineate in my remarks, that this tradition that we have had in the West at certain times, which has stood for a notion of the goodness of human beings. The United States essentially had been founded on those very principles, very much influenced by Leibniz. These are the criteria that has to be raised as the battle cry, whereby not tolerating deliberate falsifications, which are unfortunately a major factor in creating the tensions and the geopolitical dangers that we're up against. But that fight, I think we can do it. I think we will continue to do that with the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden, with our friends and allies. And as Martin Luther King once said, we shall overcome.
Thank you. Okay. If there is no other further comments by any of the panelists, we then conclude this very, very productive and fascinating webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Counselor.
Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Wang, so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for all the insights.
And convey our greetings, of course, to Ambassador Shui.
Yes, thank you very much, Stephen and Hossein. Yeah, and for this wonderful webinar. Thank you.
Thank you and
Thank you.
goodbye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.